Saudat Opa once lived for only one person, her daughter. Nothing else mattered more. Not sleep, not comfort, not her own dreams. Only her little girl, Mohira. Years earlier, after her husband died suddenly from illness, Saudat Opa raised Mohira completely alone. Tiny rented house, factory work, long, exhausting nights sewing clothes for extra money. And despite all the hardship, she never complained. Because mothers survive pain differently when children depend on them. Every morning, Saudat Opa woke before sunrise, prepared breakfast, walked Mohira to school, then worked until her hands physically hurt. Sometimes she skipped meals secretly, just to buy school supplies for her daughter. And every time Mohira apologized sadly, Saudat Opa smiled warmly and answered, "One day you will have a beautiful life." That sentence became her entire purpose. Saudat Opa once lived for only one person, her daughter. Nothing else mattered more. Not sleep, not comfort, not her own dreams. Only her little girl, Mohira. Years earlier, after her husband died suddenly from illness, Saudat Opa raised Mohira completely alone. Tiny rented house, factory work, long exhausting nights sewing clothes for extra money. And despite all the hardship, she never complained, because mothers survive pain differently when children depend on them. Every morning, Saudat Opa woke before sunrise, prepared breakfast, walked Mohira to school, then worked until her hands physically hurt. Sometimes she skipped meals secretly just to buy school supplies for her daughter. And every time Mohira apologized sadly, Saudat Opa smiled warmly and answered, "One day you will have a beautiful life." That sentence became her entire purpose. Years passed. Mohira grew up intelligent, beautiful, ambitious, exactly the future Saudat Opa dreamed about. She studied hard, won scholarships, eventually moved to the city for university, and for the first time, Saudat Opa felt proud enough to cry, because everything she sacrificed finally meant something. Every painful year suddenly felt worth it. Mohira later became successful quickly. Good job, luxury apartment, expensive clothes, modern lifestyle. The poor little girl from the tiny rented house disappeared completely. And Saudat Opa loved seeing her daughter successful, even if the success slowly created distance between them. At first, the changes felt small. Mohira called less often, visited less frequently, sounded busier every month, but Saudat Opa understood, or at least she tried to. "Work is difficult," she told neighbors proudly. "My daughter is building her future." Still, some nights felt painfully lonely, especially after turning 65. Old age arrived quietly. Knee pain, weak hands, forgetting small things sometimes. And suddenly, the strong woman who once carried everything alone needed help herself. One rainy evening, Saudat Opa waited excitedly near the window, holding homemade food carefully packed inside containers. Mohira promised to visit after work. Hours passed. Rain continued falling. The food became cold. Still, Saudat Opa kept waiting. Then, finally, near midnight, her phone rang. "Mohira." Saudat Opa immediately smiled brightly while answering. "My daughter, I kept waiting." "Sorry, Anna," Mohira interrupted tiredly. Something came up. Silence. Tiny, painful silence. But Saudat Opa forced warmth into her voice anyway. "That's okay, Kism. You work hard." Mohira sighed quietly, then suddenly whispered something unexpectedly cold. "You don't have to cook every time." Saudat Opa froze slightly, confused. "I only wanted to make your favorite food." "I know," Mohira answered quickly, "but honestly—" Long pause, then the sentence quietly breaking a mother's heart. "My friends think it's strange sometimes." Sadath Opa stopped breathing for one painful second. Rain hitting the window sounded louder because deep down she understood exactly what Mohira meant. The old village mother, simple clothes, traditional food containers, not modern enough for city life anymore, not elegant enough, not sophisticated enough. And suddenly, Sadath Opa realized something heartbreaking. The daughter she spent her entire life protecting was slowly becoming ashamed of her. Still, she smiled softly through tears Mohira could not see, then quietly answered, "I understand." But after the call ended, Sadath Opa sat alone beside the cold, untouched food for a very long time. Because sometimes children forget the hands they hide from the world were the same hands once holding them when they had nothing. After that phone call, something inside Sawadat Opa became quieter. Not angry, not bitter, just quieter. Because mothers notice emotional distance long before children admit it exists. Still, she continued loving Mohira the same way, calling every evening, asking if she ate properly, reminding her to wear warm clothes during cold weather. Tiny, ordinary acts of motherhood. But now, most conversations felt rushed. "Anajan, I'm busy. I'll call later. Meeting started. Friends are here." And slowly, later stopped coming at all. Meanwhile, Mohira's life in the city became more luxurious every month. Business dinners, fashionable friends, modern cafes, expensive parties, perfect photos online, perfect smiles, perfect life. At least that's what social media showed everyone. One evening, Mohira attended a birthday dinner with wealthy coworkers inside an elegant restaurant. Soft music, crystal lights, beautiful atmosphere. Everyone laughed loudly while sharing stories. Then suddenly, Mohira's phone rang. Onijan. The name appeared brightly on the screen. Immediately, one coworker smiled teasingly. "Aw, your village mom again." Everyone laughed lightly. Not cruelly, just casually. But somehow, the laughter embarrassed Mohira deeply. Without thinking, she quickly silenced the phone, then placed it face down on the table. For the rest of dinner, Sawadat Opa kept calling repeatedly. 5 missed calls, then 6, then 7. Meanwhile, inside the small old house outside the city, Sawadat Opa sat alone near the kitchen floor after slipping badly earlier that evening. Pain shot through her knee. Her hands trembled while trying to stand again. And the only person she wanted nearby was her daughter. But Mohira never answered. Hours later, after the dinner ended, Mohira finally checked her messages annoyed. Then suddenly froze. A neighbor had sent a voice message. Urgent tone. "Mohirakism, your mother fell earlier. She keeps saying not to worry you, but I think she's in pain." Instant guilt hit Mohira violently. She called immediately. This time, Sawadat Opa answered quickly despite obvious weakness in her voice. "My daughter?" Mohira stood silently beside the restaurant entrance while cold wind moved through the city streets. "Why didn't you tell me you fell?" Sawadat Opa laughed softly, trying to sound normal. "It's nothing serious." Lie, because even now she still protected her daughter from stress before protecting herself. "Did you eat?" Sawadat Opa asked immediately afterward. The question shattered Mohira unexpectedly because despite pain, despite loneliness, despite being ignored all evening, her mother still only worried about her. And suddenly, for one painful second, Mohira remembered childhood again. Fever nights, warm soup, her mother carrying her to school through snow. Tiny sacrifices invisible to children until adulthood. Guilt burned briefly inside her chest, but pride quickly covered it again. "I'll visit this weekend," Mohira said quietly. Sawadat Opa immediately smiled. "You work too hard already." Even now, still thinking of her daughter first. After the call ended, Mohira stared silently at the city lights for several long moments. Then, one coworker suddenly approached, smiling. "Everything okay?" Mohira forced a smile instantly. "Yeah, just family stuff." And just like that, the guilt disappeared back under modern, busy life again. Meanwhile, far away inside the tiny, quiet house, Sawadat Opa slowly reheated dinner for one person. Only one plate, only one cup of tea. And while eating alone silently, she kept smiling softly at old childhood photos of Mohira nearby. Because mothers continue loving children completely, even after becoming lonely inside that love. Winter arrived early that year. Cold wind moved through the city streets, gray skies, long, silent evenings, and inside Saudat Opa's small house, loneliness grew heavier every day. Her knee pain worsened. Walking became slower now. Cooking exhausted her quickly. Sometimes she forgot small things, too, where she placed her glasses, whether she already took medicine. Tiny signs of aging quietly appearing. Still, whenever Mohira called, Saudat Opa always sounded cheerful, always smiling through the phone, always pretending everything was fine. Because mothers often hide suffering to avoid burdening children. One evening, Mohira finally visited after nearly 2 months. Luxury coat, expensive perfume, perfect makeup, beautiful as always. Saudat Opa's face instantly brightened with happiness, seeing her daughter at the door. "My kuzum came." She hugged Mohira tightly, too tightly, like someone starving emotionally for affection. And suddenly, Mohira felt uncomfortable, not because of hate, because city life had slowly changed her without noticing. The small, old house now embarrassed her. The outdated furniture, the smell of old medicine, the neighbors greeting too loudly. Everything felt far away from the elegant, modern life she built. Meanwhile, Saudat Opa happily prepared tea while talking endlessly. Stories, memories, questions. Simple joy from finally seeing her child again. But Mohira barely listened fully. Her attention constantly moved toward work messages on her phone. At one point, Saudat Opa accidentally dropped a teacup because of weak hands. The cup shattered loudly on the floor. Saudat Opa immediately panicked. "Oh no! Oh no!" She bent slowly, trying to clean broken glass. But Mohira suddenly lost patience. "Anajan, stop!" The sharpness in her voice silenced the room instantly. Saudat Opa froze, like a frightened child, and seeing that expression briefly hurt Mohira and Sa. Winter arrived early that year. Cold wind moved through the city streets, gray skies, long, silent evenings, and inside Saudat Opa's small house, loneliness grew heavier every day. Her knee pain worsened. Walking became slower now. Cooking exhausted her quickly. Sometimes she forgot small things, too, where she placed her glasses, whether she already took medicine. Tiny signs of aging quietly appearing. Still, whenever Mohira called, Saudat Opa always sounded cheerful, always smiling through the phone, always pretending everything was fine, because mothers often hide suffering to avoid burdening children. One evening, Mohira finally visited after nearly 2 months. Luxury coat, expensive perfume, perfect makeup, beautiful as always. Saudat Opa's face instantly brightened with happiness seeing her daughter at the door. "My cousin came." She hugged Mohira tightly, too tightly, like someone starving emotionally for affection. And suddenly, Mohira felt uncomfortable, not because of hate, Because city life had slowly changed her without noticing. The small old house now embarrassed her, the outdated furniture, the smell of old medicine, the neighbors greeting too loudly. Everything felt far away from the elegant modern life she built. Meanwhile, Saudat Opa happily prepared tea while talking endlessly. Stories, memories, questions. Simple joy from finally seeing her child again. But Mohira barely listened fully. Her attention constantly moved toward work messages on her phone. At one point, Saudat Opa accidentally dropped a teacup because of weak hands. The cup shattered loudly on the floor. Saudat Opa immediately panicked. "Oh no! Oh no!" She bent slowly, trying to clean broken glass, but Mohira suddenly lost patience. "Onajan, stop!" The sharpness in her voice silenced the room instantly. Saudat Opa froze, like a frightened child, and seeing that expression briefly hurt Mohira inside. But exhaustion and stress spoke louder than compassion now. "You can't keep living alone like this," Mohira sighed tiredly. Saudat Opa quietly lowered her eyes. "I manage." "No," Mohira answered firmly. "You don't." Silence filled the tiny kitchen heavily. Then Mohira finally said the sentence changing everything forever. "I found a care home for elderly people." Saudat Opa stopped moving completely. The world suddenly felt silent around her, only the clock ticking softly nearby. "A care home?" she whispered slowly. Mohira immediately spoke quickly, trying to sound practical. "They'll help you there. Doctors nearby, people your age. It's safer." Saudat Opa stared at her daughter silently for several painful seconds, and deep down, both women knew the real truth already. This wasn't only about safety, it was about inconvenience. Modern, busy life no longer had space for old, fragile mothers. Tears slowly filled Saudat Opa's eyes now. Very quietly, she asked the question truly breaking the room. "Did I become difficult to love?" Mohira immediately looked away, because suddenly guilt entered her chest sharply, but pride still refused honesty. "It's not like that." Lie. Maybe not completely, but partly, and both understood it. The next morning, Mohira drove her mother toward the elderly care home outside the city. Long, silent road, rain touching the car windows softly. Saudat Opa held one small bag on her lap quietly, everything she owned fitting into one bag after an entire lifetime. Meanwhile, she kept looking outside silently at passing streets, places filled with memories, life, motherhood, sacrifice, and now, goodbye. When they finally arrived, the building looked clean, safe, professional, but painfully lonely. Old people sat quietly near windows waiting for visitors who rarely came. And suddenly, for the first time in her entire life, Saudat Opa felt abandoned. Mohira helped carry the small bag inside, awkwardly, trying not to look emotional, trying not to feel like the worst daughter alive. Before leaving, Saudat Opa gently touched Mohira's face lovingly, exactly the same way she did when Mohira was a little girl, then softly whispered through tears, "Don't work too hard, Kazam." That sentence shattered Mohira internally, because even now, after being left behind, her mother still only worried about her happiness. Moments later, Mohira walked away quickly toward the car without looking back again. But inside the rearview mirror, she still saw her old mother standing alone near the doorway holding that tiny bag silently, growing smaller and smaller as the car disappeared into the rain. The elderly care home was quiet, too quiet, not peaceful quiet, lonely quiet. The kind of silence created when people wait for visits that rarely come. At first, Mohira called her mother regularly, every evening, every few days, promising herself this arrangement was temporary. But slowly, life became busy again. Meetings, deadlines, parties, travel, and just like before, the calls became shorter, then less frequent. Meanwhile, Sao.Opa never complained, never asked to come home, never cried during phone calls. Instead, she always sounded cheerful, always asked if Mohira ate properly, always reminded her to sleep early, still being a mother from far away. One afternoon, Mohira received a call from the care home unexpectedly during work. At first, she almost ignored it. Another meeting had just started, but something inside her chest suddenly felt strange, cold, uneasy. She answered quickly. The caretaker's voice sounded soft. "Please come when possible." Instant panic entered Mohira's body. What happened? Silence. Then quietly, "Your mother's health became weaker." The drive toward the care home felt endless. Rain covered the roads again. Funny how painful moments always arrived with rain. When Mohira finally entered the building, everything looked frighteningly still. Old people sitting silently near windows, television playing softly in the background, nurses walking quietly through hallways, and suddenly, guilt crushed her harder than ever before, because for the first time, she truly saw the place not as a care center, but as somewhere forgotten parents waited alone. Sao.Opa slept quietly inside a small room near the back hallway, thinner now, weaker, older somehow. Seeing her like that shattered Mohira emotionally, because suddenly she no longer saw an embarrassing old village woman, only the exhausted mother who spent her whole life loving her. Mohira slowly sat beside Sao.Opa's bed, holding her weak hand carefully. Warm tears rolled down her face silently, and for the first time in years, she whispered honestly, "I'm sorry, Ona." Sao.Opa slowly opened her eyes hearing her voice, and immediately smiled softly, despite obvious pain. My Kizim came. No anger, no blame, only happiness. That unconditional love nearly destroyed Mohira emotionally. Later that evening, while helping organize her mother's belongings, Mohira noticed something hidden carefully beneath the pillow. An old notebook, worn edges, small handwriting. Curious, she opened it slowly, and instantly her entire world stopped. Every page contained notes about her, about Mohira, tiny memories, tiny sacrifices. One page read, "Today, I skipped lunch so Mohira could buy university books." Another, "My daughter sounded tired during the phone call. I wish I could cook soup for her again." Another page, "I think I became a burden now. I should complain less so she doesn't feel stressed." Tears blurred Mohira's vision completely, hands shaking violently now. Then suddenly, she reached one final page near the back, and the sentence written there shattered her soul completely. "If one day my daughter stops loving me, I hope she still remembers how much I loved her first." Mohira collapsed crying beside the bed immediately, real crying, broken crying, because suddenly, every ignored phone call, every moment of embarrassment, every lonely dinner her mother ate alone returned all at once like punishment. And deep down, she realized something horrifying. The woman she slowly pushed away was the same woman who spent her entire youth just to give her a better future. Meanwhile, Sao.Opa slept peacefully beside her, still unaware that her daughter's heart was finally breaking completely. That night, Mohira didn't sleep at all. She sat beside her mother's bed, holding the old notebook tightly against her chest, reading every page again, every sacrifice, every hidden pain, every moment her mother protected her silently without expecting anything back. And with every sentence, guilt crushed her deeper, because suddenly success no longer felt beautiful, luxury no longer impressed her. Nothing mattered except one terrifying truth. The person who loved her most in the world spent months feeling unwanted. At sunrise, Sadaopa slowly woke up and smiled softly, seeing Mohira still there. "You should go to work, Kazum." That sentence shattered Mohira again. Even now, even after abandonment, her mother still worried about disturbing her life. Mohira suddenly knelt beside the bed, crying uncontrollably. No, no more work, no more excuses. Sadaopa looked confused. Then Mohira whispered through tears, "Please come home with me." Silence filled the small room instantly. Sadaopa stared at her daughter quietly, almost carefully, like someone afraid to believe happiness too quickly. "Home?" she whispered softly. Mohira nodded desperately now. "Yes, I was wrong. I became selfish. I forgot everything you sacrificed for me." Tears rolled endlessly down her face. And for the first time in many years, the successful, elegant businesswoman disappeared completely. Only a guilty daughter remained. Sadaopa gently touched Mohira's hair, lovingly, exactly like childhood again. Then softly whispered, "You were never a bad daughter." Those words destroyed Mohira emotionally, because forgiveness from parents hurts differently when you know you don't deserve it yet. A few days later, Mohira brought her mother home. Not the old, tiny rented house, her own luxury apartment in the city. At first, Sadaopa moved carefully through the beautiful apartment, almost nervously, as if afraid to touch anything. And suddenly, Mohira realized something heartbreaking again. Her mother once gave her entire life freely, yet now felt like a guest inside her daughter's home. That realization changed everything inside her permanently. Slowly, life began changing between them. Mohira canceled unnecessary dinners, ignored meaningless parties, came home earlier from work, and every evening, for the first time in years, they ate dinner together. Simple dinners, tea, conversation, laughter slowly returning again. One evening, while helping brush Sadaopa's hair gently, Mohira suddenly began crying quietly. "I was ashamed of you," she whispered painfully. The room became silent. Sadaopa looked at her through the mirror softly, then smiled sadly. "I know." Mohira immediately covered her face, crying harder, because hearing those words spoken gently hurt more than anger ever could. "I'm sorry." Sadaopa slowly held her daughter's trembling hands, then quietly answered, "You only forgot where you came from." Silence again. Warm, painful silence. Then softly she added, "But children sometimes lose their way. A mother's job is waiting until they find the road back." Those words healed and destroyed Mohira at the same time, because suddenly she understood true motherhood completely. Real mothers continue loving even after heartbreak. Weeks later, Mohira posted something online for the first time in months. Not luxury photos, not expensive restaurants, only one simple picture, her old mother smiling while drinking tea beside the window. And underneath, Mohira wrote, "This woman gave me everything before I had anything. Never become too successful to love your parents openly." The post spread quickly online. Thousands shared it emotionally. Many people called their mothers afterward. Some visited parents they ignored for too long. And somewhere deep inside, Mohira finally understood something priceless. The greatest shame in life is not having poor parents. The greatest shame is forgetting the people who sacrificed everything for you. For the first time in years, the apartment finally felt warm, not because of expensive furniture, not because of luxury, because laughter returned. Real laughter. Saodat Opa slowly became happier living with Mohira again. Every morning, she woke early, making tea quietly like old times, sometimes humming soft songs while cooking breakfast. And each time Mohira saw her mother smiling again, guilt eased slightly inside her heart. Maybe she still had time to fix things. Maybe love could still heal what neglect damaged. One evening, Mohira returned home earlier than usual, carrying flowers and warm bread from the bakery, excited to surprise her mother. But the apartment felt strangely quiet, too quiet. Instant fear touched her chest. Onajan? No answer. Mohira quickly walked through the apartment searching, then suddenly froze near the bathroom doorway. Saodat Opa sat weakly on the floor, holding the sink for support, face pale, breathing heavily, and beside her hand, small drops of blood stained a white towel. The flowers immediately slipped from Mohira's hands. Ona! She rushed toward her mother in panic. Saodat Opa tried smiling weakly. It's nothing. Lie. Terrible lie. Because mothers continue hiding pain, even when their bodies can no longer do so. Hours later, inside the hospital office, Mohira sat trembling beside her mother while doctors reviewed test results silently. The atmosphere felt wrong immediately, too serious, too careful. Finally, the older doctor removed his glasses slowly, then quietly said, "She has cancer." The world stopped, completely stopped. Mohira stared blankly at the doctor, unable to breathe properly. "No." Very small whisper. "No." The doctor continued carefully. She hid symptoms for a long time. Long time. Those words shattered Mohira even more, because suddenly she understood something horrifying. While she spent years being embarrassed by her mother, Saodat Opa silently carried sickness alone too. "How long did you know?" Mohira whispered shakily, turning toward her mother. Saodat Opa lowered her eyes quietly. "A few months." Mohira felt physically sick hearing that. "A few months?" Tears exploded from her eyes instantly. "Why didn't you tell me?" Saodat Opa smiled softly. Sad smile. Mother's smile. "You were already busy carrying your life." That sentence destroyed Mohira completely, because even while becoming sick, even while feeling abandoned, her mother still tried protecting her from stress. The drive home that night felt unbearable. Rain touched the windows softly again, and beside her, Saodat Opa looked small somehow, fragile, human, not the strong, invincible mother from childhood anymore. For the first time in her life, Mohira realized parents do not stay forever, and suddenly, time became terrifying. That night, Mohira entered her mother's room quietly after midnight. Saodat Opa already slept peacefully, weak breathing, gray hair spread softly across the pillow, and beside the bed, the old notebook still rested carefully. Mohira slowly sat beside her mother, holding her fragile hand tightly, then finally cried harder than ever before, because suddenly she understood the cruelest truth adulthood teaches children. One day, the hands that raised us become weak, and no amount of money in the world can buy more time afterward. After the diagnosis, everything in Mohira's life changed overnight. Meetings stopped mattering, luxury stopped mattering. Even success itself suddenly felt empty, because deep down, only one terrifying thought remained inside her mind now. What if I lose her before fixing everything? That fear followed her everywhere, at work, inside elevators, during phone calls, even while trying to sleep. And for the first time in many years, Mohira finally understood something her mother always knew. Family is not something waiting forever. Time moves quietly. Parents grow old quietly. And children realize love too late, frighteningly often. Sidat Opa started treatment immediately. Hospitals, medicine, weakness, long, exhausting days. But somehow, she still smiled gently every morning seeing Mohira beside her, because for mothers, children returning emotionally feels more healing than medicine sometimes. One afternoon during chemotherapy, Mohira sat beside her mother holding soup carefully while nurses moved quietly through the hospital room. Sidat Opa looked exhausted, much thinner now, hands weaker. Yet when Mohira adjusted the blanket around her carefully, Sidat Opa smiled proudly. "You became caring again," she whispered softly. Those words shattered Mohira emotionally, because suddenly she remembered another time, long ago, fever nights during childhood, her mother staying awake beside her bed until morning, cold towels on her forehead, warm soup, protection, and painfully, she realized motherhood had always looked exactly like this, staying, even when tired, even when nobody notices. That evening, Mohira returned to work only briefly to organize important documents. Coworkers stared surprised seeing her simpler clothes. No makeup, no expensive energy anymore, only exhaustion. One colleague approached carefully. "You missed an important investor dinner." Months earlier, that sentence would have terrified Mohira. Now, she calmly answered, "My mother needs me." Simple words, but somehow they felt more meaningful than every business achievement before. Later that night, while helping Sidat Opa walk slowly toward the balcony for fresh air, Mohira suddenly stopped beside her quietly. City lights glowed beautifully outside. Cold wind touched the curtains softly, and with tears slowly filling her eyes, Mohira whispered, "I wasted so much time." Sidat Opa gently looked toward her daughter. "No." Soft smile. "You were building your life." Mohira shook her head, crying now. "I was building everything except what truly mattered." Silence filled the balcony heavily. Then, finally, Mohira knelt beside her mother emotionally and held both her fragile hands tightly. "I promise you something." Sidat Opa watched her quietly, and through tears, Mohira whispered the words coming directly from her broken heart. "No matter how busy life becomes again, you will never feel unwanted another day in your life." Sidat Opa immediately began crying softly too, because deep down, every mother only wants one thing: to still feel loved by the child she sacrificed everything for. That night, for the first time in years, they slept in the same room together, like childhood again. Mohira holding her mother's weak hand while Sidat Opa slept peacefully beside her. And somewhere inside the dark, quiet room, a daughter who almost lost her mother forever finally found her way back home emotionally. Winter became colder as Sorot Opa's illness slowly worsened. Some days looked hopeful, other days terrifyingly fragile. The treatments exhausted her now. Walking became difficult again. Even simple conversations sometimes drained all her energy. But despite everything, she still smiled whenever Mohira entered the room, still asked whether her daughter ate properly, still worried more about others than herself. And every time, Mohira's heart broke a little more, because now she finally saw clearly. Real mothers continue loving even while disappearing slowly. One snowy evening, Saurot Opa fell asleep early after treatment. The apartment remained quiet, soft yellow lights glowing warmly near the windows. Meanwhile, Mohira cleaned medicine bottles and folded blankets carefully near the bedroom, trying to stay busy, trying not to think about fear. Then suddenly, she noticed something beside her mother's pillow, a folded letter, her name written carefully across the front, "For my daughter." Instant panic touched Mohira's chest. Hands trembling, she slowly opened the letter. And the moment she began reading, tears filled her eyes immediately. The letter said, "My beautiful Kizum, if you are reading this, then maybe I became too weak to say these things aloud." Mohira already cried silently now. The handwriting shook slightly across the page, but every word carried warmth, love, motherhood. First, please stop blaming yourself. Mohira covered her mouth, crying harder, because even now, her mother still tried protecting her heart. The letter continued, "You gave me the happiest days of my old age when you brought me home again. I was never angry with you, lonely sometimes, but never angry." Those words shattered Mohira emotionally, because forgiveness from parents feels unbearably pure. Then suddenly, she reached the middle of the letter, and the next sentence completely broke her. "The greatest moments of my life were not when you became successful. It was when you were little and held my hand proudly in public." Mohira collapsed beside the bed, crying uncontrollably now, because suddenly she remembered childhood again, walking beside her mother through crowded markets, holding her hand tightly without shame, without embarrassment, without pride, just love. Pure, innocent love children naturally give before adulthood changes them. Tears blurred the letter completely now. Still, Mohira forced herself to continue reading. "My daughter, one day you may become richer, busier, more important to the world, but never become too important to hug your mother." Silence filled the room heavily. Only Mohira's crying remained. Then finally, the last lines appeared, and those final words carved themselves permanently into her heart forever. "When mothers grow old, please don't leave them where strangers must remind them they are loved. I carried you before you could walk. Please stay beside me when I no longer can." The letter slipped from Mohira's trembling hands immediately. She buried her face into the blanket beside her sleeping mother, crying like a broken child. Because suddenly, every lonely night Saurot Opa spent inside the care home returned like punishment. And deep down, Mohira realized something devastating. Old parents do not fear death most. They fear becoming unwanted. That night, Mohira climbed carefully beside her sleeping mother and wrapped her arms around her gently, just like childhood again. And through endless tears, she whispered softly into the darkness, "I'm here now, Ona. I'm finally here." Spring arrived quietly that year. Flowers slowly returned to the city, warm sunlight touched the apartment windows again, and for a short while, life almost felt normal. Almost, because deep down, everyone inside the house understood the truth already. Saurot Opa was becoming weaker, very slowly, very quietly, but impossible to ignore now. Some mornings, even lifting a teacup exhausted her. Walking from one room to another required support, yet somehow she still smiled whenever Mohira looked worried, still pretending to be stronger than she felt, because mothers continue comforting children even while fading away. One afternoon, while organizing medicine near the kitchen, Mohira suddenly froze looking at the calendar. Tomorrow, her mother's birthday, and instantly guilt stabbed through her chest again. How many birthdays had she missed? How many quick phone calls replaced real hugs? How many lonely cakes did her mother eat alone while pretending everything was fine? That realization became unbearable. So, that night, Mohira quietly prepared everything herself. No luxury restaurants, no giant celebration, only love. Real love. She decorated the apartment softly with tiny lights and flowers, cooked her mother's favorite food exactly the way Saodat Opa once cooked for her during childhood, even baked a small homemade cake badly for the first time in her life. The kitchen became a disaster. Burnt cream, broken eggs, flour everywhere. But somehow, Mohira smiled through tears while doing it, because for the first time, she understood how much invisible effort mothers put into ordinary happy moments. The next morning, Saodat Opa slowly walked into the living room using support from the wall, then froze completely. Tiny lights glowing softly, flowers near the table, birthday cake, and in the center, Mohira standing there crying already. "Happy birthday, Ona." Saodat Opa immediately covered her mouth emotionally, because deep down, this was all she ever truly wanted. Not money, not luxury, only time with her daughter. Mohira carefully helped her mother sit near the table, then softly laughed through tears. "The cake looks terrible." Saodat Opa smiled warmly. "It looks beautiful." And somehow, that simple sentence healed part of Mohira's broken heart. They spent the entire day together, looking through old photo albums, laughing at childhood memories, crying sometimes too. At one point, Mohira found an old school drawing inside the album, stick figures holding hands under the sun, a little girl, her mother, and above them, tiny childish handwriting, "My best friend." Mohira instantly broke down crying again, because somewhere between growing up and becoming successful, she forgot that truth. Later that evening, while sunset painted the apartment orange softly, Saodat Opa suddenly looked toward her daughter quietly, then whispered, "This is my happiest birthday." Mohira immediately held her hand tighter. "No, you'll have many more," but both women understood the lie. Silence filled the room softly afterward. Not frightening silence this time, loving silence. Then suddenly, Saodat Opa reached weakly toward Mohira's face and smiled gently. "You finally came back to me." Those words shattered Mohira completely, because deep down, she realized her mother never truly wanted success from her, only closeness, only love, only the little girl who once held her hand proudly. That night, after Saodat Opa fell asleep peacefully near the window, Mohira sat beside her silently watching her breathe, and for the first time in years, she prayed desperately for more time, not success, not money, only more time with her mother. Because once parents begin disappearing slowly, children finally understand the true value of ordinary days. Summer arrived quietly. Warm wind moved through open windows. Birds sang outside in the mornings. And life continued moving forward, even while one small family secretly prepared for goodbye. Saodat Opa became weaker every week now. The illness no longer hid itself gently. Walking stopped completely. Food became difficult. Even speaking sometimes exhausted her. But despite everything, her eyes still softened every time Mohita entered the room, still full of love, still full of motherhood. And every day, Mohita stayed beside her. No more late meetings, no more parties, no more pretending work mattered more. Now she brushed her mother's hair slowly, fed her soup carefully, read old stories aloud beside the bed at night, and secretly cried afterward inside the bathroom where Saudat Opa couldn't hear, because watching parents become fragile breaks something inside adult children permanently. One evening, rain began falling softly outside again. Saudat Opa sat quietly in her favorite chair near the window, wrapped in a warm blanket. The same chair where she always waited for Mohita's phone calls years earlier. Funny how life circles back painfully sometimes. Mohita knelt beside her, gently adjusting the blanket, then softly whispered, "Are you cold?" Saudat Opa smiled weakly. "No, Kazim." Long silence followed, only rain touching the glass softly. Then suddenly, Saudat Opa looked outside and whispered something unexpected. "I used to sit here every night waiting for you." Mohita instantly felt tears rising again. Saudat Opa continued quietly. "Every car sound made me think, maybe my daughter came home." Those words shattered Mohita's heart completely, because suddenly she imagined her mother sitting alone night after night beside this same window, waiting, hoping, loving someone too busy to notice the loneliness. Mohita buried her face into her mother's lap, crying uncontrollably now. "I'm sorry." Real broken crying, the kind arriving too late. Saudat Opa slowly touched her daughter's hair lovingly with trembling, weak fingers, then softly whispered, "You came back." Pause. That's enough for a mother. And somehow, those words hurt even more than blame ever could, because parents forgive children with terrifying softness. That night, Mohita refused to sleep. Instead, she stayed beside the chair near the window, holding her mother's hand tightly. Rain continued outside, quietly, the apartment dark and peaceful. At some point after midnight, Saudat Opa suddenly squeezed Mohita's fingers weakly, very weakly, then softly whispered, "My little girl." Mohita immediately looked up, crying, "Yes, Ona." Saudat Opa smiled faintly. "Tired?" Even now, still worrying about her daughter first. Mohita shook her head desperately. "Never." Saudat Opa slowly closed her eyes afterward, peaceful, calm. And while rain touched the city softly outside, the tired mother who spent her whole life loving one child quietly took her final breath beside the window where she once waited for her daughter to come home. Silence filled the room, terrible silence. Mohita froze completely, still holding her mother's hand, still waiting for another breath, another movement, another smile, but none came, and suddenly the world became unbearably empty. "No!" Tiny whisper, then louder, "Ona!" Realization shattered her completely. Mohita collapsed beside the chair, crying harder than she ever had in her entire life. Because deep down, she understood something devastating too late. One day, every child loses the voice calling them, "my daughter." Days later, after the funeral, the apartment felt painfully quiet. No soft footsteps, no tea boiling in the mornings, No loving questions asking if she ate properly. Only silence. Then, one evening, Mohita walked slowly toward the chair near the window again, her mother's blanket still folded carefully there, and beside the chair, the old notebook remained. Mohita gently held it against her chest, crying softly, then looked outside the rainy window, whispering through tears, "I came home too late." Because sometimes children spend years chasing success, only to realize the people waiting at home were the true treasure all along. If your parents are still alive, please call them today. Visit them, hug them, sit beside them without looking at your phone, because one day their chair will become empty, and the silence afterward will hurt more than words can explain. Never become too busy for the people who once gave you their entire life. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe, because some stories are not just entertainment. They remind us to love people before regret becomes permanent.